I said, "You're not speaking, Evelyn. This isn't about you anymore." Daniel's voice carried over the microphone, clear and cold, in front of the crowd gathered in the town hall. My name was still on the printed program in my lap, but now it might as well have been a ghost. The audience, neighbors I had known for decades, turned their heads toward me in an awkward silence that burned hotter than any summer sun. I am Evelyn Marlowe, 74 years old, born and rooted in this small Oregon town. For more than 40 years, I built the annual artisan fair from scratch, guiding it from a folding table in the church parking lot to the main square that could fill every hotel for miles each July. I was a jeweler by trade. The silver pendant I wore today, a piece I crafted the first year of the fair, a gift from my late husband to mark what we thought was just the beginning. Daniel Marlowe, my eldest, stood at the podium, in a tailored navy suit, a wireless headset hooked around his ear like he was addressing a corporate conference, not the community that had raised him. To anyone else he looked polished, efficient, in control. I knew that tone, though it was the same one he used when telling a client that their requests were unrealistic. Claire, my youngest, sat in the second row, her eyes fixed on her phone, as if the message she was typing was more urgent than the humiliation unfolding 15 feet away. The fair had always started with a short welcome from me. It was more than tradition. It was the way I thanked the volunteers, the vendors, the sponsors, the kids who had saved up coins all year to buy a single hand-woven bracelet. I had prepared my words carefully, printed them on a note card in a font big enough for my eyes. When I'd approached Daniel about reading it this year, he'd smiled and said we'd talk. I mistook that for agreement. Now he spoke as if the decision had been mutual. "This year we're streamlining the program to focus on the exciting new partnerships we've developed," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, never landing on me. "We have a new vision for the fair's future, and I think you'll all agree it's going to put us on the map in ways we never imagined." The audience clapped politely. I felt the program slip from my fingers to the floor, the words I had wanted to say about the first elderly woodcarver who sold out his wares in 2 hours. About the young potter who got her start here and now, shipped her work across the country, died somewhere between my chest and my throat. The pendant at my collarbone felt heavier than silver had any right to be. Sylvia Reynolds, who had been on the organizing committee for 10 years, caught my eye from across the aisle. She mouthed something later, or sorry, I couldn't tell, but quickly looked away when Daniel's voice rose again. "We'll be showing a short film about the fair's history," he said. "You'll see how far we've come, and where we're headed." The lights dimmed, the projector whirred, and images filled the large portable screen. I recognized the early years, instantly, booths under blue tarps, paper signs fluttering in the wind, but something was off. The captions read, "Founded by Daniel Marlowe, inspired by community heritage." My name was absent. Shots of me in the background were brief and blurred, as if by accident. The ribbon cutting in year 10, where I stood front and center with the mayor, had been replaced by a shot of Daniel shaking hands with a sponsor. I leaned forward, trying to see if my ears had deceived me, but the narration confirmed it. Daniel Marlowe envisioned a fair that would bring artisans and visitors together, and under his guidance it has flourished. There was no mention of me gathering the first group of vendors in my kitchen, no word about my late husband hauling plywood stands in his pickup at dawn, no acknowledgement of the decades I'd spent weaving the fair into the town's fabric. Claire's head stayed down, her fingers tapping her phone faster now. I wondered if she was texting him, warning him, or if she simply couldn't bear to meet my eyes. The film ended with a sleek logo, Marlowe Heritage Fair, letters crisp and modern, colors matching Daniel's company branding. Applause again, longer this time. Daniel thanked the founders and team in broad terms, but never once spoke my name. When the ceremony broke for coffee and pastries, I stood, smoothed the skirt of my navy dress, and walked toward the exit. Several people murmured my name, their faces a mix of confusion and pity. One older man clasped my arm and said, "I thought you started this thing." I forced a small smile. "You thought right," I said, and kept walking. Outside, the late morning air was cooler, scented faintly with the cedar shavings from the woodturner's stall. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, past the row of delivery trucks with Daniel's company logo on the sides. I could see him through the glass doors behind me, laughing with the sponsor, his arm draped casually over the back of a chair. He looked exactly like someone who had one. I turned the pendant between my fingers. feeling the delicate curves I had hammered and soldered half a lifetime ago. Inside the town hall, the fair would go on without me. Inside my chest, something older and heavier than anger began to take shape. This wasn't just about a speech, it was about my name, my work, my life being lifted out of the story as if I'd never been there at all. By the time I reached the car, I knew one thing: I had been erased, and I would not stay erased. When the town hall emptied after that opening ceremony, I stayed outside, letting the cool air bite at my skin. I didn't want to linger near the chatter of people telling Daniel how inspiring the video had been. My pendant sat warm against my collarbone from the heat of my hand. I'd been gripping it without realizing. I told myself I wouldn't dwell on it. I told myself there was still the rest of the fair weekend to enjoy. But the next morning, while walking through the vendor rows, I saw something that turned irritation into something far heavier. The official booth at the entrance where we used to hand out flyers and a program with a short history of the fair now had a glossy, trifold brochure on the cover, that same modern logo from the film. Inside, in a paragraph about the origins of the event, there was no trace of my name, no mention of the kitchen meetings, the first donation drive, the small victories of those early years. Instead, it read, "Founded in 2005 by Daniel Marlowe. The Marlowe Heritage Fair brings together artisans and audiences in a celebration of craft and culture." I took a copy and tucked it into my bag. The young woman working the booth smiled politely, clearly not recognizing me. That alone made me feel like the ground had shifted. For decades I couldn't walk a block during Fair Week without being stopped for a handshake or a thank you. Now I could walk right past the information table, invisible. On Sunday afternoon, I decided to sit in on the Community Partners Luncheon. I had always been part of it in the past, but this year no invitation had come. I found the side door open and slipped in, taking a seat at the back. Daniel stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up now, speaking to a group of business owners and local officials. His tone was smooth, practiced. "With our rebranding," he said, "we can position the fair as a major regional draw. We've already secured preliminary talks with corporate sponsors who can take us to the next level." He clicked to the next slide on his laptop. My eyes caught on an image I hadn't seen before, a composite photo of him shaking hands with a state tourism representative. Beneath it, the caption read, "Daniel Marlowe, founder and director." I glanced around the room. Nobody looked surprised. That evening, I called Claire. My daughter's voice was warm but distracted. I could hear the muffled hum of a television in the background. "I saw the brochure," I said, "and the presentation." There was a pause long enough to make me wonder if she'd hung up. "Mom," she said finally, "it's just marketing. You know how these things work. People want a fresh face." "I'm not dead, Claire. I didn't say you were, but maybe it's easier if you let Daniel handle things now. You've worked hard enough." Her words were soft, but the edge in them cut just the same. That night, I couldn't sleep. I took the brochure from my bag, spread it on the kitchen table, and compared it to last year's program. The differences weren't just in style, they were deliberate omissions. My photo with the mayor was gone. The list of original artisans had been shortened, leaving out half a dozen names I remembered as clearly as my own. On Monday morning, I stopped by the community center where the fair committee stored its archives. I still had my key. The shelves smelled faintly of dust and cedar, lined with binders, old posters, and boxes of photographs. I pulled the first binder marked 2005 to 2010 and flipped through the pages. In one sleeve, I found the original mission statement I had typed myself. Beneath that was a folded letter on town stationery. My stomach tightened when I saw my own handwriting at the bottom. It was dated 8 years ago, in the middle of my husband's final illness. The letter was addressed to the Town Events Council, requesting a temporary leave from my duties as fair director to focus on family care, with the understanding that I may return when able. The ink had faded slightly, but my signature was clear. I heard footsteps and turned to see Sylvia Reynolds in the doorway. She had always been quick with a smile at committee meetings, but today she hesitated. "I thought you might come by," she said, stepping in. "Daniel's been asking about the archives. Has he taken anything?" Her eyes shifted to the box she was carrying. "Some photos, a couple of the old vendor lists. He said they'd be digitized for promotion." I didn't press her. Sylvia had been on the committee long enough to know where loyalties could be dangerous. Still, she lingered a moment longer. "You should check the council's minutes from last quarter," she said. almost under her breath. Then she set the box down and left. After she was gone, I sat on the floor with the letter in my lap. The thought of Daniel using it as proof that I had stepped aside permanently lodged in my mind like a splinter. It explained the casual way he'd told the crowd the fair had a new vision. By Tuesday, I had made my way to the town clerk's office. The clerk, a man I'd known since he was a boy, greeted me politely but kept glancing toward the open doorway of the conference room. When I asked for the minutes from the last council meeting, he hesitated. "You're still considered a member emeritus," he said, as if the title were a consolation. I signed the request form and waited at a small table while he retrieved the binder. The pages were neatly typed, each motion recorded in careful detail. There it was, in black and white: motion to recognize Daniel Marlowe as sole director of the Marlowe Heritage Fair, citing founder's retirement due to personal circumstances, passed unanimously. Founder's retirement. No one had called to confirm it with me. No one had even sent a letter. I closed the binder slowly. My pulse was steady, my hands calm. This was no misunderstanding. It was a clean, quiet removal, sealed with the authority of the council and framed as a natural transition. On the way out, I passed the bulletin board by the entrance. Pinned to it was a flyer for the fair's Future Plans Forum next month. Daniel's photo dominated the page. At the bottom, in smaller print, it read, "Presented by Marlowe Events, LLC." I walked home, the flyer folded into my coat pocket. The sky was low and gray, the kind of weather that makes you keep your head down, but mine stayed up. Somewhere between the archives and the council minutes, I'd stopped feeling invisible. I was starting to see the shape of what had been taken, the quiet precision with which it had been done. What Daniel hadn't counted on was that I knew this town's history better than anyone. I had lived it, and I still had the keys. The week after the fair, I tried to return to my usual routine. Mornings in the shop, polishing silver and setting stones. Afternoons at the kitchen table with invoices and a cup of tea. But every task felt half finished, as though the air had shifted and wouldn't settle again. The brochure lay folded in my drawer, the council minutes in an envelope on the counter. I wasn't sure yet what I meant to do with them, but I couldn't put them away. On Thursday, I heard from Sylvia Reynolds for the first time since that day in the archive room. She called from the community center and asked if I could come by. Her voice was low, as if she didn't want anyone nearby to hear. I walked over, the pendant against my skin like a small weight I'd grown accustomed to carrying. When I arrived, Sylvia was alone in the meeting hall. A stack of papers sat on the table between us. She gestured for me to sit. "I've been on the committee long enough to recognize when something isn't just business," she said. "You should see this." The papers were printouts of an email thread between Daniel and several members of the organizing committee. The earliest message, dated 2 months before the fair, laid out a strategic rebranding plan. In it, Daniel wrote that the fair needed to modernize its narrative and streamline historical references for broader appeal. Nowhere in the plan was my name. He suggested replacing founder with visionary leader and made sure that title pointed to him. I flipped to another page. This one was a draft script for the promotional film. With my contributions to the fair reduced to a single sentence, local volunteers helped bring the first event to life. No mention that I'd been the one to invite those volunteers, to convince skeptical vendors to set up their booths in the wind and rain, to make sure they left with enough sales to try again the next year. Sylvia sat across from me, hands folded. "He's got most of them convinced it's just marketing," she said. "But I've been in enough of these meetings to know when someone's trying to rewrite the story." I asked her why she was showing me this. She looked at me for a long moment. "Because I remember the first year. I remember you carrying crates of pottery down Main Street yourself. I don't like seeing people erased, Evelyn." I slipped the papers into my bag. "Before I left," she added, "if you really want to know how far this goes, check with the Chamber of Commerce. He's been in there a lot lately." The next morning, I walked into the chamber office under the pretense of renewing my vendor permit for the shop. The receptionist, a woman I'd seen at countless ribbon cuttings, smiled politely but seemed uneasy. On the counter was a binder labeled Event Partnerships 2023 to 2024. While she stepped into the back room, I slid it toward me and opened to the first page. There was a memorandum of understanding between the Chamber and Marlowe Events, LLC, outlining exclusive rights to coordinate sponsorship for the fair. My pulse quickened as I read the clauses: control over vendor selection, authority to approve all marketing materials, and sole discretion in determining the event's heritage narrative. The document was signed by Daniel and the Chamber president. The receptionist returned, and I closed the binder, forcing a pleasant expression. She handed me my renewed permit, and I thanked her, tucking it into my bag alongside the printouts Sylvia had given me. That afternoon, I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Are you at work?" I asked. "Yes. What's going on?" "I've been hearing things about the fair, about Daniel taking over sponsorships." A pause. "Mom, he's trying to grow it. He's doing what he thinks is best." "Best for who?" Claire's sigh was audible even over the line. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Can't you just let him handle it? You don't need the stress." I didn't answer. The space between us had always been gentler than this, but now it felt like a narrow bridge with the boards missing. Later that week, I attended the Saturday market, where some of the fair's longtime vendors sold their goods year-round. I stopped by Linda Chase's booth, where she was arranging hand-woven scarves. She greeted me warmly, but I noticed a flyer on her table, with the new logo. "They sent these to all of us," she said. "Told us to use them for consistency." I asked if she'd been to any of the recent committee meetings. She shook her head. "Vendors aren't invited anymore. Daniel says it's more efficient to keep decisions in-house." As I walked away, I saw the same flyer on 2 more tables. The new branding was spreading fast, replacing the old hand-painted signs and mismatched banners that had once given the fair its charm. It wasn't just a visual change, it was a takeover, quiet and thorough. That evening, I spread the papers from Sylvia, the notes from the chamber binder, and the brochure across my kitchen table. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a series of accidents or oversights. Daniel had been moving in this direction for months, maybe longer, and he wasn't working alone. He had the committee, the chamber, and enough of the vendors under his banner to make resistance look like stubbornness. Still, I knew this town. I knew its memory was longer than the glossy brochures suggested. There were people who remembered those first years, the cold mornings, the borrowed tents, the way we'd pass the hat for musicians because there was no budget for entertainment. I just had to find them before their voices were drowned out entirely. For now, I gathered the papers back into the envelope and slid it into the top drawer of my desk. The pendant at my collarbone felt steady, almost cool now. If Daniel wanted to erase me, he would have to do more than print new brochures. He'd have to make the people who knew me forget, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I hadn't spoken to Patrick Miller in years. He had been one of my late husband's closest friends, a sharp-minded attorney who'd never truly retired, just stopped taking cases for strangers. We ran into each other by accident on Main Street one Tuesday morning. I was leaving the post office and he was coming out of the bank with a folder under his arm. His hair had thinned to silver, but his eyes were the same, quick, assessing, hard to fool. "Evelyn," he said, shaking my hand, "I've been meaning to find you." It caught my attention. We exchanged a few pleasantries before he glanced around and lowered his voice. "Do you have a few minutes?" We walked to the coffee shop on the corner, found a table in the back. Once we had our mugs, he slid the folder toward me. "I'm not part of the council anymore," he began, "but I still get copies of certain filings. You should see this." Inside was a letter from the Town Events Council to the state's Department of Cultural Affairs. It confirmed the transfer of full administrative and operational authority for the Marlowe Heritage Fair from me to Daniel. The justification, in tidy legal language, cited my formal retirement and personal request for withdrawal from duties. At the bottom, attached as evidence, was a scanned copy of the letter I'd written 8 years ago when my husband was dying. I read it twice, my jaw tightening. I never said I was retiring. I said I needed time. "I know," Patrick said, "but in the right hands or the wrong ones, that's enough to establish intent, especially if no one disputes it at the time." I closed the folder and sat back, and the council just went along with it. They voted unanimously. Daniel's been convincing people this is the natural progression. Younger leadership, more growth, new markets. He's good at selling ideas. I thought of the brochure, the film, the flyers on vendors' tables, the way he'd said "we" when talking about the fair's future, as though we'd been partners until I decided to step away. Patrick leaned forward. "You could challenge it. but you'd need evidence that you never intended to relinquish control. And frankly, it's easier if you start gathering that before he moves on to the next step. What's the next step? I asked. Patrick's mouth thinned. If I were him, I'd make sure the name and all related marks were secured. Once that happens, even if you prove you were misrepresented, you'd be fighting uphill for years. After he left, I stayed at the table, staring at the folder. The coffee had gone cold. Around me, people came and went, chatting about errands and weekend plans. I slipped the documents into my bag and walked out into the pale afternoon light. 2 days later, I attended the monthly craft guild meeting. I had been a member since before the fair existed, and it was one of the few places left where I still felt like myself. But that night, Daniel showed up unannounced, smiling as if he'd wandered in on a whim. He greeted people by name, shook hands, and then launched into a brief speech about exciting opportunities for artisans who partnered with Marlowe events. When the meeting ended, I lingered by the door. As Daniel passed, I said quietly, "I saw the council letter." He paused just long enough for a flicker of something to cross his face, then smoothed it into his usual charm. "I'm just making sure the fair survives. Mom, you did your part. Now let me do mine. You used my letter from when your father was sick." His smile didn't waver. It was in the archives. Nothing secret about it. That wasn't a resignation. Call it what you want. The council saw it differently. He stepped past me, his cologne trailing behind. "You should be thanking me for keeping your legacy alive." I watched him walk away, the words settling in my chest like stones. It wasn't just about being pushed aside anymore. He was building a legal foundation under it, one that would be hard to dismantle once it's set. That weekend, I dug through my own files at home, receipts from the early years, lists of vendors I'd personally recruited, letters from visitors thanking me for the fair. Each one was a small piece of the story as it had truly happened. I didn't know yet how I would use them, but I knew they might matter. On Sunday evening, I called Sylvia. "Did you know Daniel filed a transfer of authority with the state?" She hesitated. "I'd heard something, but no one said it outright. The council meetings aren't exactly open anymore. I need the minutes from the last 2 years," I said. "If there's a paper trail, I want to see it." By Monday afternoon, she'd left an envelope at my shop. Inside were copies of meeting notes, and in them, references to streamlining governance and aligning event leadership with commercial partnerships. My name was mentioned only once in the context of my supposed retirement. That night, as I laid the papers out on the kitchen table, the pendant at my neck felt heavier than usual. The silver was cool against my skin, but the memory of making it, of holding it in my hands the day my husband gave it back to me as a gift, was sharp and clear. It reminded me of a time when my work couldn't be taken from me with a vote or a signature. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the neat block letters of the council's resolution, my own faded handwriting beneath it. By morning, I knew I couldn't simply wait to see what Daniel would do next. If Patrick was right, the name was the next prize he'd go after. And if he got it, the fair wouldn't just be his in practice, it would be his in law. I made 2 calls before breakfast. One to Patrick, to ask if he would walk me through the process of checking federal trademark filings. The other to a woman in Salem who still owed me a favor from the year we'd fought to keep the county fairgrounds from being sold. If Daniel was planning to secure the name, I intended to know before the ink dried. The fair had always been a place where the town gathered to celebrate what it could make with its own hands. I wasn't about to let the story of how it came to be rest in someone else's, not while I was still here to tell it. Patrick called me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, his voice clipped and direct. "I checked the USPTO database like you asked. There's a pending application for Marlowe Heritage Fair, filed by Marlowe Events LLC. Owner listed as Daniel Marlowe." I leaned against the counter, the receiver pressed tight to my ear. "When? 3 weeks ago. It's public record, but most people don't bother to look until it's too late." 3 weeks ago would have been right after the council vote. He was moving fast, sealing the story into law before I could catch my breath. I thanked Patrick and hung up, staring at the quiet shop around me. The shelves gleamed with pieces I'd shaped by hand, each one mine in a way no document could take away. But the fair, that was different. Its name could be signed away with a few strokes of a pen. That evening, I called Claire. She answered, sounding tired. "Can this wait?" she asked. "It can't. Your brother's filed to own the fair's name outright." There was a pause, then a sigh. "I know. You know. He told me he was doing it. He says it'll make things easier. Contracts, sponsorships, legal protections. Legal protections for who? Claire. Because once he owns the name, I can't even tell the fair's story without his permission. Her voice hardened. Mom, you're overreacting. It's just paperwork. Paperwork is what erases people, I said. But she didn't answer, and after a moment, the line went dead. The next day I stopped by the bank to check on my own accounts. The teller, who'd known me for years, seemed hesitant. There was a request from your son to access your safety deposit box, she said quietly. It wasn't approved. You're the only authorized signer, but he seemed to think you'd given permission. I hadn't. The box held a few pieces of my own work I'd kept for sentimental reasons, along with the original hand-drawn logo of the fair, signed by every artisan from the first year. If Daniel had gotten hold of that, it would have been another piece of history folded neatly into his version of events. Leaving the bank, I saw a banner hanging across Main Street, "Coming soon, the new era of the Marlow Heritage Fair." The design matched the trademark application I'd seen in Patrick's email. Underneath was a row of sponsor logos, some local, some corporate. I recognized one in particular, a regional chain, known for buying out small craft businesses and replacing their goods with mass-produced imitations. That night, I called Sylvia. She didn't pick up, but she called back an hour later. Sorry, she said. Daniel's been having closed-door meetings with a few vendors. I didn't want to talk in the building. What kind of meetings? The kind where people walk in with their independent stalls and walk out signed to exclusive supply deals under his company name. I felt the skin at the back of my neck tighten, and they agreed to this. Some did. He's promising them guaranteed spots at the fair, higher visibility, maybe even stipends. It's tempting if you don't know the bigger picture. On Friday morning, I visited one of those vendors, a potter named Mark who'd been at the fair since its second year. His shop smelled of clay and glaze, just as it always had. When I asked about the meeting, he shifted uncomfortably. Look, Evelyn, I respect you, but Daniel's offering terms I can't ignore. I've got 2 kids in college. If signing with him means I can pay tuition and still sell my work, I have to think about it. I understood his position, but it drove the point home. Daniel wasn't just claiming the name. He was absorbing the people who gave the fair its soul. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with every document I'd gathered so far, filings, Sylvia's printouts, my own notes, and began organizing them into a timeline. It was all there, in black and white. The council vote, the trademark application, the sponsorship deals, the vendor contracts. Piece by piece, he was turning a community event into a corporate property, and I was being erased from every layer of it. On Sunday, as the rain beat against the windows, I made a decision. I would not confront him directly, not yet. He was too good at twisting the narrative, too quick to frame my resistance as bitterness. Instead, I'd keep collecting, watching for the moment when all of it could be seen at once, undeniable. Before I put the papers away, I reached into the drawer and took out the silver filigree pendant. The delicate wires still caught the light the way they had the day I'd made it. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was proof that something built with patience and skill could outlast anyone's attempt to claim it. I fastened it around my neck and left it there. If Daniel thought I was finished, he'd forgotten who taught him to start from nothing. Patrick met me at the diner on a Tuesday morning, the kind of place where the smell of coffee clings to your coat long after you've left. He slid into the booth with a folder already open, a single page on top. "This," he said, tapping it with one blunt finger, "is the federal trademark filing. Marlow Events LLC, status, pending. If it gets approved, the name, the logo, even certain phrases associated with the fair will be legally his." I read the line twice. The applicant was listed as Daniel Marlow, owner and managing director. My name was nowhere, not even as a previous owner or co-founder. The description of the event was written like an ad campaign, an annual celebration of artisan craft, curated for a modern audience. "He's claiming curation," I said, sliding the page back, as if he sifted through scraps and found something worth polishing, instead of inheriting it ready to shine. Patrick leaned back. "We can oppose the application, but it's time-sensitive. If we miss the deadline, he gets presumptive rights, and you'll be fighting uphill." I stirred the sugar into my coffee slowly. "What do you need from me? Proof of your prior use. Evidence that the name and mark are tied to you in the public's mind. Old posters, newspaper articles, vendor testimonials, anything." thought of the boxers in my attic, stuffed with programs, photographs, and handwritten thank you notes from vendors and visitors alike. I have it, I said. Every year, every flyer. I kept them all. Patrick nodded. Good. We'll need witnesses, too, people who'll stand up and say, it was yours before it was his. After breakfast, I drove straight home and climbed into the attic. Dust bloomed in the sunlight as I opened the first box. There was the original banner hand-painted letters, on canvas creased but still bold, the inked vendor list from the first fair, each name written in my hand, a photograph of me standing at the ribbon cutting, scissors in one hand, the silver filigree pendant bright at my neck. By evening, the kitchen table was covered in proof. Patrick came by, scanning each item with the care of someone who knew exactly what it could be worth in front of an examiner. This, he said, holding up the photo, might be the strongest piece. Public event, clear date, your name, in the caption. The next morning, I stopped by the community library. Claire was at the reference desk, her hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked up, surprised to see me. Mom, is everything okay? I need access to the archives, I said. The local paper's coverage of the fair, all years. Her expression tightened. Is this about Daniel? It's about the truth. She hesitated, then handed me a guest pass. Don't drag me into this, she said quietly. I spent 3 hours scrolling microfilm, printing every article that mentioned the fair's founding. My name appeared in the earliest coverage, over and over. In some pieces, Daniel was mentioned only as Evelyn's son, who assisted with logistics. The stack of pages grew thick enough to need a binder clip. As I walked back to my car, a voice called my name. A woman in a navy jacket stepped forward, offering her hand. Emily Grant, she said. I run communications for the Thunderbirds. The baseball team, I asked. She smiled. And the stadium. I heard you might be looking for a large venue for a statement. I studied her face, wondering how much she knew. Where did you hear that? From someone who doesn't like what Daniel's doing, she said simply. If you ever want an audience, I can give you one. 50,000 seats. Cameras, live feed. It was too early to make a promise, but I took her card. I'll keep that in mind. That night, I called Patrick and told him about Emily. He was quiet for a moment, then said, if we time this right, you won't just block the trademark, you'll show everyone exactly why it shouldn't exist in his name. The idea lodged in my mind like a seed. For now, I had work to do. I spent the next week gathering more evidence, calling old vendors, asking if they'd be willing to put their memories in writing. Some hesitated, afraid of losing their spots under Daniel's management. Others agreed without pause, their voices fierce with indignation. Sylvia was one of the first to send her statement. She described the kitchen meetings, the nights we'd stayed up counting cash from the donation jar, the year I'd walked the length of Main Street in the rain to make sure every vendor had a tarp. Her words made me remember the feel of those years in my bones-tired feet, chapped hands, the satisfaction of watching the fair grow one honest inch at a time. Patrick compiled it all into a formal opposition letter. When I signed it, my pen didn't tremble. The silver pendant caught the lamplight, and I thought, he may have the filing, but I have the story, and I'm not done telling it. By early spring, Patrick had filed the opposition to Daniel's trademark application, but the process moved slowly. The town moved faster. Banners for the new era of the Marlow Heritage Fair hung on lampposts, and the corporate sponsors' logos had grown bolder, taking up more space than the event's name itself. Sylvia called me one Thursday morning. Her voice was tight, like she was speaking through her teeth. You should see the contract he's got lined up, she said. It's not public yet, but it will be soon. 7 figures. And not a dime going to the fair. What's it for? Title sponsorship. One of those regional conglomerates, the kind that buys out small operations and sells everything under their own brand. That evening, I found a copy of the draft agreement in my mailbox, no note attached. The paper was thick, the ink crisp. The first page laid it out in plain language. In exchange for $1.2 million, Marlow Events LLC would grant exclusive naming rights, advertising control, and a share of all vendor fees for 10 years. The payment would go directly to Daniel's company. The fair, as a community event, was mentioned only as a production under his management. I read the whole thing twice, then called Claire. Did you know about this? She hesitated. He told me it was a chance to stabilize the fair's finances. Stabilize, Claire. The money isn't going to the fair, it's going to him. The fair will still be run on volunteer hours and vendor fees, while he collects the sponsorship cash. She sighed. You're assuming the worst. I'm reading the contract. There's nothing to assume. Silence stretched long enough that I could hear the faint hum of her desk fan through the line. Finally she said, maybe you should talk to him directly. I will, but not the way he expects. 2 days later, I drove to the edge of town to see someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Ruth Anderson. We'd grown up together, started our first craft booths, side by side, and then drifted apart after a falling out. Neither of us had the energy to repair, but if anyone remembered how the fair began, it was Ruth. She opened her front door before I reached the porch. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. Her hair was shorter, her voice a little rougher, but the sharpness in her eyes hadn't faded. Inside, she made coffee and listened while I laid out everything: Daniel's rebranding, the council vote, the trademark filing, the sponsorship deal. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You're right to be angry, and you're right to think you need more than just proof he's lying. You need to make it impossible for him to deny it in front of the right audience. I've got Emily Grant at the stadium, I said. 50,000 people, cameras, live feed. Ruth smiled faintly. Then you need a hook. Something that makes people look up from their phones and see you, not just hear about you. We spent the next 2 hours talking through what I had: photos, vendor statements, archived articles. Ruth added her own pictures from our first booth together, receipts from shared supply orders, a Polaroid of us at the fair's original opening day, the pendant at my neck catching sunlight. When I left, I had a box of her records in my back seat and a feeling I hadn't had in months: momentum. That weekend, I spotted Daniel outside the chamber building, shaking hands with a man in a tailored gray suit. The suit matched the logo on the draft contract. I slowed my walk, keeping to the far side of the street. Daniel laughed at something the man said, then gestured toward the fairgrounds as if showing off his kingdom. I didn't interrupt. Instead, I drove straight to Patrick's office. He flipped through the contract, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. This is worse than I thought, he said. With a deal like this in place, he'll have leverage. Even if the trademark gets denied, the sponsors will back him as the face of the fair because he's already tied their money to his company. Then we cut the tie before it's public, I said. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. You have something in mind. I told him about Emily's offer. His lips twitched. Not quite a smile. If you're going to do it, better be ready for the blowback. He won't take it quietly. I'm counting on that, I said. For the next week, Ruth and I worked like we had in the old days: late nights, stacks of paper, coffee gone cold before we remembered to drink it. We pieced together a timeline that started with the first planning meeting in my kitchen and ended with Daniel's sponsorship contract. Every statement had a photo or document to match. Every gap was filled with a first-hand account from someone who had been there. Emily called midweek. The Thunderbirds have a home game the night before the sponsorship announcement, she said. The stadium's yours if you want it. We can run your material on the big screen between innings. It'll go out live to our streaming audience. Book it, I said. By Friday, I had the presentation loaded onto a flash drive, labeled in block letters so there could be no mistake. I slipped it into my desk drawer beside the pendant, the cool silver catching my fingertips. Daniel thought he'd written the ending to my story. He didn't know I was about to read it aloud to an audience big enough to remember who started it. The stadium lights burned white against the night sky, the kind of brightness that made every detail razor sharp. 50,000 people filled the seats, the air thick with the smell of hot dogs, beer, and the restless hum of a game in progress. My hands didn't shake, not even as I touched the silver filigree pendant at my neck. Emily met me in the service corridor behind the scoreboard. Once we start the between innings break, you'll have a 45-second slot. The feed goes to the entire crowd here, and to the live stream. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked over my flash drive like it was a lit fuse. Daniel's here, I asked. She nodded. Luxury box. Brought the sponsor's CEO with him. If you hit play, he can't stop it without looking like he's hiding something. I followed her up the narrow stairs to the control booth. The sound of the crowd swelled, a wave that crested just as we stepped inside. The tech operator slid my drive into the console, tested the first frame, my old photos, the original festival banner, Ruth's Polaroids. On your cue, Emily said. Down below, Daniel leaned over the rail of his box, laughing at something. The CEO said. He didn't see me in the booth. He didn't know I'd spent the past month gathering every receipt, every signed statement, every image of him using my work to line his pockets. The inning ended. The scoreboard went black. Then, the first image bloomed across at me, 30 years younger, standing with Ruth under the archway I'd built by hand for the fair's opening. The crowd quieted. The next frame showed Daniel's sponsorship contract, his name bold at the top, the fair's name buried 3 paragraphs down. I didn't narrate. I didn't need to. The sequence spoke for itself. The town council's vote, transcript, the trademark application, the checks from the sponsor made out to Marlowe Events LLC. Vendor affidavits appeared one after another, swearing their fees had doubled under Daniel's management, while community funding vanished. Then the photo changed to this year's new era, poster my name erased. Daniel alone in the spotlight. The image froze, and in the silence that followed, I stepped to the microphone. My name is Evelyn Marlowe, I said, my voice carried across the PA system. I founded the Marlowe Heritage Fair to bring our community together. I never sold it, I never gave it away. And I never agreed for it to be turned into someone's private business. The crowd murmured, some clapped, others turned toward Daniel's box. This, I continued, is what happens when history is rewritten in boardrooms instead of remembered in our hearts. But every one of you here tonight knows where it began. You were there. The last image appeared a close-up of the silver pendant, the same one, at my neck now, taken the day my husband gave it to me. The stadium screens caught the real pendant glinting under the lights. The match between the two was undeniable. Daniel's face was pale now, his hands gripping the rail. The CEO beside him shifted uncomfortably. People in nearby seats were pointing, some raising their phones, recording. The feed ended, and the game resumed. But the crowd wasn't the same. Pockets of people were talking, gesturing, looking toward the luxury box. Emily slipped me a small smile. You got them. Daniel didn't stay for the rest of the game. I watched from the tunnel as he left early, the CEO trailing behind, both of them avoiding eye contact with the fans who leaned over the railing to shout questions. Outside, as the last inning wrapped, a group of local reporters waited. They'd seen the broadcast on their phones and wanted statements. I gave them the simplest one I could. This is our fair. It belongs to the people who built it, not to anyone's balance sheet. By the time I drove home, the footage had already been clipped, captioned, and shared. Messages pinged my phone non-stop. Old friends, former vendors, strangers thanking me for saying what they'd felt for years. Daniel had spent months controlling the narrative. In less than a minute, I'd handed it back to the crowd, and they weren't giving it up again. 3 days after the stadium, Daniel's lawyer sent a formal notice withdrawing the federal trademark application. A day later, the town council announced a special meeting to restore the governance structure of the Marlowe Heritage Fair to its original community-based model. They invited me to take back the chairmanship. I declined in a single sentence. I didn't fight to sit at the table again. I fought so the table would belong to everyone. The papers ran with it. Local radio replayed my words between weather reports and high school football scores. Sponsors quietly rerouted their contributions to the community trust that Patrick had helped them set up. Overnight. Daniel didn't show his face in town for a week. Claire told me he'd moved most of his meetings to Portland. I didn't ask her to choose sides. She'd already been standing in the crossfire long enough. When she came by with a bag of groceries and sat with me in the kitchen, neither of us mentioned his name. Ruth stopped in with a box from her attic, flyers, handwritten notes, photos from the fair's first decade. She placed them on my table like she was returning something sacred. People remember, Evelyn. No one can scrub that out. I spent the next week answering messages, not just from neighbors but from strangers who'd seen the video online. Some wrote about their own families, about being erased from something they'd built, about sons, daughters, siblings who'd decided shared history was just another asset to be privatized. The fair's website went live again under the community banner. My name was there, not in bold letters, not framed like an idol, but placed where it belonged, in the opening paragraph of the history page. On the first Saturday of the reopened fair, I walked through the gates wearing my silver filigree pendant. Vendors waved. Kids darted past with candied apples. The air smelled of wood shavings and hot cider, just as it had 30 years ago. Daniel wasn't there. He didn't need to be. The fair no longer depended on him, and that was the victory. When The mayor asked if I wanted to say a few words. I shook my head. I'd already said enough in the only place it needed to be heard. Now, it was the fair's turn to speak for itself. That night, I sat alone on my porch and thought about everything that had happened. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt level, like a ledger that had finally been balanced. Looking back now, I see the whole path, not just the fight, but the cost. I learned that the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from people who know exactly where your soft spots are. Daniel didn't just strip my name from a festival. He counted on me staying quiet because we were family, because I'd value peace over truth. For a while, he was right. That's the most dangerous trap in family conflicts. The belief that silence preserves love. It doesn't. It preserves the imbalance that benefits the one taking from you. I've come to understand that you can't negotiate for respect from someone who sees your history as currency. The only way to reclaim it is to take it out of their hands entirely. That might mean giving up the role, the title, the seat you once cherished, but it's the only way the legacy survives intact. If you're in that position, here's my message to you. Don't confuse endurance with loyalty. You can survive the loss of a role. You can survive the cold shoulders and the gossip. What you can't survive is letting someone else decide the worth of your own story. The moment you reclaim it, even if you have to walk away from the table, you've already won. If you've been here with me through this story, thank you. There are more stories worth telling, and I hope you'll be here when the next one begins. Subscribe if you want to see where we go next.